Solicitor. Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, when we broke for lunch, I was asking you about Mr. Jones coming into an interview on the night of August 7th and saying, I've got what my mother has, I'm hearing voices, all the crazy behavior and all the statements that he was making. My question to you is, isn't that unusual for somebody who's truly suffering from a mental illness?
Probably less so for someone who's bipolar disorder, who's disinhibited, a little more so for someone who's just psychotic. Does that make sense? Because the disinhibition, you get more from the mood disorders and less of that from a thought disorder.
So if he was really thought he was schizophrenic and really thought there were voices in his head, why wasn't he telling that people his whole life?
Well, I think he covered it for a long time. He didn't want anyone to know. He was ashamed of it until his illness escalated.
Well, he did go and talk with April Haynes, his marriage counselor, back in 2012, I think.
That's correct.
2012 to 13, for 14 hours, and they talked about, I think he came in talking about voices, is that correct?
He came in talking about depression and anxiety related to his breakup with Amber, and then having kind of a monster inside of him related to the loss of his mom or abandonment by his mother.
Upon conversation with Dr. Haynes, the monster came out really to be jealousy and negative thoughts, right?
Jealousy, negative thoughts, and then feeling kind of abandoned and lost without his mother.
In everything you've reviewed, have you seen anything documented anywhere prior to his statement on August 7th about, I've got what Cindy has, about hearing voices?
You mean on September 7th?
September.
No, nothing related to that.
You would agree with me that being confronted by the police after you killed your children would be a good time to make up a story.
Could be.
And when we talk about that, we're talking a little bit about malingering, right?
That it's actually lying, not malingering. There's lying, and then malingering is actually making up symptoms to get out of something.
So there's just, okay, you're right. So you have outright lying and just making up everything. Malingering is an exaggeration of symptoms.
Or creation of symptoms that aren't right.
Creation of symptoms
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that you have previously testified, this is a true statement, usually when defendants malinger, it is pretty obvious. I mean, they call attention to other people in the room that you don't see. They claim to hear voices directing them to harm someone.
That's one example or two examples.
And under testimony before, under oath, you testified when asked, has anybody ever tried to fool you before? And your answer was a lot. And that is true. I'm sure it's not uncommon for people to try to fool you, is it?
As a forensic evaluator, it's pretty common.
You also testified in response to this question, it is a higher probability when that person has criminal charges pending over them. And your answer was yes, and that's true.
Yes.
So you expect to look for it?
Yes.
You were asked, have you ever been fooled? Your answer under oath was, I feel that I've been fooled at times.
Yes.
So you have been fooled before.
I think we've all been fooled at times.
So you don't know, you have an opinion, but you can't say with certainty that you're not being fooled by Tim Jones.
I think I can within reasonable medical certainty that I'm not on this issue.
You had made a comment that I found interesting and wanted to follow up with. You said that you were talking about, I guess, Amber describing issues with Tim back in 2011.
You mean her statement? I don't know what you're referring to specifically.
He had taken the job for Intel and they moved to South Carolina, and that you were referring to, I believe, Tim's parents repeating something that Amber had said?
It was actually a phone call conversation among the three of them, Julie Jones, Tim Jones Sr., and Amber. And this was after he was missing. I think if that's what you're talking about. And she was talking to them about the problems he'd had since they moved to South Carolina.
That he wasn't right, that he had erratic behavior, and he needed a psychiatrist?
Yes.
That's all you know is...
Yeah, I mean, I had a transcript of what she had said on the phone.
Did you ever talk to Mr. Jones about that and ask him what was going on at that time?
Well, he was missing at that point.
No, this is from 2011.
When she's referring back to when he came, I'm confused about the questions.
My understanding was that the conversation had to do with when they first came to South Carolina, which is when he got a job at Intel, which was, I believe, in 2011.
Correct.
Eastville, South Carolina, in a small trailer.
Correct. I think she saw the relationship change, and he started having problems when they moved to South Carolina.
Did you talk to him about that?
Not about that particular phone call. I mean, he's the one who told me that things started going south around that time period, too. So.
You had testified earlier about neurological testing, and that goes into the traumatic brain injury.
Neuropsychological testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, doctor, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The neuropsychological testing that was done in this case, it was done back in 2016
Correct.
by Dr. Brawley.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Brawley has not testified, just so you know,
I did not know that. Thank you.
but your report is something that you relied on.
Her report, yes.
The testing that was done on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just cognitive testing.
Correct.
And when we say cognitive testing, we're just talking about what?
I think what his intellectual functioning was, and then also she looked at issues around or related to his memory and processing.
And he did terrible, didn't he?
He did.
He was in the worst percentiles in processing speed. Right?
Yes.
Like he was 1 percentile in processing speed.
Yes.
He was also on 320 milligrams of Geodon, wasn't he?
Yes.
So, do you really give this much weight?
So I think that the medication clearly affected his functioning. I do think it's important to note that she tested him for malingered memory issues, and he did not malinger. So that was important for me to know that. And she also said that medicine could cause this to be impaired, his thinking to be impaired, but she didn't think that it solely was related to medication. So.
When you were talking about malingering, we were talking about exaggerating his symptoms or lying.
Yes.
But
yes.
She only tested him in relation to his memory.
Yes, but he didn't have any active psychotic symptoms then either. So I don't think it's appropriate to assess for malingered psychosis if there aren't any active symptoms. He wasn't complaining of any current symptoms of psychosis then.
At the moment of testing?
At the moment of testing.
So you're saying that they should do testing when somebody is in a psychotic episode?
Well, if they're claiming voices or claiming psychosis, currently it's a screening. There's screening tools that you can actually use to assess that. But if they're not claiming anything, any kind of symptoms, I don't know why you would want to assess them with a current malingering tool as an evaluator.
Her testing was done in April of 2016.
Correct. And yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Was he experiencing psychotic symptoms at that time?
No.
So when do you say he's experiencing psychotic symptoms? It's not every time he hears a voice, obviously, is it?
His symptoms of psychosis resolved with treatment, after several months of treatment. So this was after that. And he really didn't have psychotic symptoms for a very long time until just the last couple months.
Well, he has reported infrequently through the years of hearing voices and seeing permutations. We said the permutations actually weren't consistent with anything, right?
He has reported those symptoms before he was treated, but then after a period of time with treatment, most of that resolved until the most recent month, which could have just been the stress of trial.
So it's psychiatrists talk to people, review stuff, make a diagnosis. A psychologist administers tests.
Correct. Well, they also make diagnoses.
They make diagnoses
Yes.
as well. But psychiatrists don't administer tests or interpret tests, right?
Correct.
You ask the psychologist.
We just ask psychologists to do testing to have objective data to help us with evaluations.
So that I'm clear, are you saying when should neuropsychological testing for the presence of psychosis be done?
If you truly, well, okay, that's different than malingering scales. I think you were asking me about tools to assess malingering. For current psychological testing, I mean, clearly you would like them to be a little bit more stable so they can sit through testing and not be actively psychotic. For the purpose of a forensic evaluation, though, malingering tools can be useful if someone is claiming active symptoms and you suspect that they could be malingering.
One of the things that you reviewed, I believe, is Dr. Cruz's report. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And that was neuropsychological testing that Dr. Frierson requested.
That's correct. And just see if I can find her report.
Sure.
Okay.
She administered the same, you said earlier, the RBANS test was one that I think they both did, right?
Yes.
And that is a cognition test that has to do with looking at verbal learning, delayed verbal learning, semantic fluency, delayed recall of a complex design.
Yes.
When Tora Brawley administered it to him when he was on 320 milligrams of Geodon, he was in the first, the third, the first, and the first % respectively.
Yes.
There was a controlled verbal fluency for letter Qs. He was in the first % with Dr. Brawley. When Dr. Cruz administered the test, he was in the 79th percentile.
Correct.
So how do you explain that difference if it's not for the drugs?
I think he was on much, much less medication at the time that he saw Dr. Cruz. So I think, in fact, he was on almost no medication when he saw Dr. Cruz.
So no question the cognitive part of it.
Was affected by the medication.
And as far as malingering, he wasn't, even in Brawley's test, she said that he wasn't malingering as far as to the cognitive part.
Correct.
Dr. Cruz did some testing on symptom validity.
Yes.
My understanding is that is looking for the presence and claim regarding psychosis. Is that correct?
Yes.
She did and there's also some validity testing that goes along inside there to make sure they're doing right and trying.
That they're putting effort through, yes.
The dot counting test, that's an effort test. The Ray 15 and the Ray 15 item recognition and item memory test, those are both effort tests.
Yes, they're tools that we use to assess malingering often.
And then she did, doctor, there were 3 that she did that she had concerns about. One was the Sims test, and she noted that in one of the subcategories in the psychosis level, he had a 6, correct?
Correct.
And not her words, but what psychologists all have agreed on is that the score of 6 is clinically significant for the report of atypical symptoms of psychosis, correct?
Yes, I think what it warrants is to do the SIRS, which is the next test. So they're screening tools for malingering, all of these tests. So I think if there is a certain, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but just from reading these reports as an evaluator, I think they also look at those and decide if they're going to do additional tests.
And she did. She did an additional test, the SIRS
Yes.
test. On that one, he also had scores that were notable.
He did.
It says on one scale, was in the definite range of improbable and absurd symptoms, correct?
He did.
And 2 scales were in the probable range of rare symptoms and symptom combinations, correct?
He did.
So does that second test give you any concern about malingering or exaggerating the claim of psychosis?
I think it can, but I was very confused with this testing because he was not having active symptoms. So these are current tools that you use if someone's actively reporting symptoms. At the time that he saw her, he didn't have any symptoms. So to me, it raised questions in my mind, is this a misuse of these tests? And when it comes to responsibility, you certainly can't use current assessment tools to go back in time. So I just didn't rely on this information because it was very confusing to me. And it was multiple tests for malingering that I understand where you're going with this, but she did not diagnose malingering, nor did Dr. Frierson, and I really didn't understand the purpose of what they were doing. Other than I do understand the cognitive piece that you've raised.
Okay, so you read it, you didn't understand why she was doing malingering testing, so it really has nothing to do with your opinion.
Correct. I mean, he didn't have active symptoms, so I didn't understand why she was doing that.
So if it's relevant, Dr. Cruz is the one to talk about it, I guess?
Yes. I mean, I do understand, I think Dr. Frierson had concerns about the IQ discrepancy with Dr. Brawley's testing. I attributed that to be too much medication. So I didn't feel like that there needed to be another test done. To me, that was pretty obvious. But these other tests, to me, I just was concerned they were misused.
There's no question he was addicted to spice, is there?
There's no question about that.
And there's no question that you can have psychosis from spice.
No question about that.
You can have paranoia. You can have auditory hallucinations.
Yes.
How do you explain on September 7th, that interview that we discussed earlier when he was foaming at the mouth and acting crazy? Is he in a psychotic moment at that time in your
Yes.
opinion? The next day, September 8th, he talks to law enforcement. He actually sees his dad. And
Correct.
He said that he saw
The old Tim.
the old Tim. So my understanding is that you can't diagnose schizophrenia unless there's been, if it's resolved itself without medical intervention. So how do you explain that one day he's in a psychotic episode and the next day he's not? How is that not related to substance-induced psychosis?
Oh, I think the substances exacerbated it. But I don't think it was just the substance. I think the acuity was much, much higher during that window with the substance. But the illness progressed even for several months after that. So I don't think it was just the drug itself.
You had testified about aimless driving, I think.
I think that's the word that Mr. Jones used. Yes.
And is that your opinion that he was driving aimlessly? Did you talk?
Well, I think he, for 9 days, drove from state to state. He had talked about going out west, but he never got there. I'm not saying he went around in circles, but he definitely went around, came back, and then went around again. To me, he never got where he wanted to go. So.
Does that mean something to you?
It means he could be very confused. He could be, disorganized in his thinking. I mean, he had some discussions about what he wanted to do, but he never did it. So it raises questions on his level of organization, his thinking.
Did you look at any of the phone extractions from his phone?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so there were internet searches. You're aware that he left and started to go in Georgia at 10:30 the next morning.
Yes.
And drove all the way to the far side of Birmingham, Alabama. And all during that time, he's doing internet searches looking for spice.
Yes. In states.
Illegal in every one of those states.
It's illegal in every one of those states. Correct.
Washington, where it's legal, right?
Yeah.
And then you're aware that he went to Walmart and purchased things to dispose of.
Yes.
He went to Advanced Auto and purchased things to do an oil change.
Yes.
And he told law enforcement in the recorded interview on the 8th, the recorded portion that I think he referred to, he was asked specifically about being aimless. And he said, I was in an aimless path toward Las Vegas. That's why I was doing this, and that explained me going around the major cities.
Yeah, but I don't think he ever got anywhere with that.
Well, he said he had a plan, and you're saying he's aimless, and that there wasn't a plan. That's where the point is.
Well, I think he used the word aimless to begin with, but yes, I mean, he did kind of go around from state to state.
You listened to the audio recording on September 8th with the Sheriff's Department and the FBI agent?
Yes.
He said, quote, "I don't know, at that point, I was just thinking, run, get rid of the bodies, and you're effed, Tim." He was thinking. I mean, that's what he said. Not that he was hearing voices. He said, I was thinking, I need to do these things. Run and get rid of the bodies. Those weren't voices telling him to do that, right?
Well, and that comment, but he also has talked about the voices during that time period. So, and actually all through the several days when he started treatment with Geodone, so which was not long after that. So it's mixed in. But I see what your point is. In that particular comment, he's talking about a thought as opposed to a voice.
So how do you know which one it is?
Well, he told me it was a voice, but I mean, I think the way it's written in the statement, it actually was, and how he said it, it was basically a thought, I guess. I think he had both.
This particular moment, which I agree, he said different things at different times. He says, I was just thinking, run, get rid of the bodies, and you're F Tim. He is thinking and says Tim, so he referred to himself as a third person, didn't he, while he was thinking?
Right, but he typically talked about the voices talking to him and calling him Tim. So that's an exception to what he's normally said.
Doctor, why is he insane?
Because he suffered and continues to suffer with a major mental illness that has a thought disorder component, specifically delusional thinking and hallucinations, and a mood disorder component at the time he was manic. And I think it affected his ability to not recognize what was legally wrong as it related to Natan. And also, it basically, he was not capable of really understanding the moral wrongfulness of what he did with the other kids.
So the mental illness that you're diagnosing with going back in time, because you saw him 3 years later, I think.
Yes.
You're saying on the night of August 28th, he was suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar.
Schizoaffective disorder, which is both.
Schizoaffective disorder.
Schizoaffective disorder, yes. Bipolar type.
And tell me why. What is it that makes a schizophrenic diagnosis for that night?
Because he had delusional thinking, he had hallucinations. Those are the
I'm sorry, the first thing was what?
He had some delusional thinking and
Delusional thinking.
he had delusions about his children and about his ex-wife.
What were the delusions?
The delusions that they were going to harm him. He had delusions that they could be in conspiracy with each other to either burn the house down or electrocute him.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
It's not rational, and these are delusional thoughts. He's psychotic.
I just want to talk about delusion before you go on. That delusion, and then if there's more delusions, you can talk about those too. So he is delusional that night because he thinks that his children and Amber are teaming up together to hurt him. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is not what he told law enforcement when he was interviewed, is it?
I don't think he talked about that. No.
He did not talk about being afraid of Amber. He talked about being afraid of all three of his children, though. He did.
He did.
Or, excuse me, all five of his children.
And I don't think he said he was afraid of Amber. I think he just said he felt like they were maybe in cahoots or collusion with each other to do something to harm him.
to be a delusion, we said it needed to be a fixed, long-term false belief. So how is that?
Well, I don't think it has to be a long-term false belief. It becomes more fixed, and a lot of his paranoid delusional symptoms started in June. So it was more of the same, but was escalating along with the manic symptoms.
But other than him telling you that he was afraid that Amber was in on this, that's not documented anywhere you could find other than him telling you that 3 years after.
Correct.
As far as the children being plotting against him to harm him, the first time you can find that is his interview with law enforcement on the 7th or the 8th or 9th, whenever, 8th or 9th, I guess.
Yes.
Again, after he's arrested. Okay, other than
there was some data. I mean, he actually was searching related to the electrical issues, the fascination that Natan had with electricity. So he did actually research some of that during that month. And that's a set of symptoms.
Did you ask him about that?
Yes.
And what did he tell you about his researching of the
He just said that he had a fascination with electricity. He didn't want him to harm himself. And then it turned into, he thought that was part of this whole plot against him.
But the plot against him didn't happen until the night he killed his children.
Correct. But it had been building since June with his paranoia with his family.
But he didn't even express to you that he thought his children were going to harm him prior to the night he killed them.
Correct.
So he had a one-night delusion?
No, I don't. I mean, I think the delusion was building, as were the manic symptoms. He just articulated it, when we were talking about that particular night.
He told you that he was not afraid of his children until the night he killed them. That was the first time he was ever afraid of his children. Isn't that what you testified to?
That was the first time he was afraid of his children, but he had thoughts that they were conspiring against him, wanting to go live with their mother. That all started prior to that.
Right. So is that true or false?
Is what true or false?
Did they want to go live with the mother?
I don't know.
So did he tell you it was a false belief?
He believed it to be true.
Okay. If I told you that it was true, does that matter to your opinion?
You mean based on what, though? I don't understand what.
Well, Mira indicated back in May of 2014 to a counselor that she wanted to go live with her mom.
I mean,
That's not in evidence.
What's in discovery that she's seen?
She's reviewed those records.
Can I see the records?
We won't see what you're looking at.
I'm sorry.
Can I see the records?
Sure you can. I'm sorry, please.
I mean, I'm sure she missed her mother. I know that they all miss their mother. I think it was probably normal to want to go live with your mother at times, but he felt like it was a plot against him.
So I guess my question to you is, because I know in part of your opinion, he's afraid of his children. That night, when Natan won't tell him why you mess with the outlets.
Yes.
Are there any other delusions going on, or is that the only delusion going on?
That's the only delusional thinking at that point.
How about later as the night progresses?
He starts having thoughts, and he's at the point after Natan's death, he actually is having racing thoughts, which is part of a mood disorder, actively hallucinating. He was confused. He talks about he's having pounding thoughts at that point, and then he was focused on what's going to happen with my kids. And at that point, he was focused on the religious reasons why they would be better off in heaven than on earth without a parent.
Well, if I understood your report correctly, his first thought is Amber doesn't want the kids.
Correct.
So is that a delusion, or was that true, or how does
I have no idea. I mean, I think she would have wanted them if he were in prison. So he just assumed that she did not based on the history.
As part of discovery, did you have an opportunity to review defendants exhibits 87, 88, and 89? Which were letters from Amber,
Yes.
2 or 3 oldest.
Yes.
And those were written
Much earlier, in March
March of
2014.
Same year.
Yes.
She tells him she loves him, doesn't she?
Yes.
So is that a delusion then, when he says the children would be abandoned by Amber? Did you explore
I
that?
don't know that that's really a delusion. That's more his just belief because of what's happened over the course of time with her. You know, the fact that he felt like she was not there for them, not visiting them regularly. He had been abandoned by his mother. I think that was all related to his thinking, disorganized thinking, and then just also the reality of what happened.
So, and then
So that's less delusional. That's more related to where he was with his mood disorder.
the next thing you notice is you said that he believed that Amber didn't want the children.
Yes.
So are we in delusion, or where are we at with that belief?
No, that's not a delusion. That's a belief. I mean, he believed that she did not want the kids and that they would be better off in heaven. He was a very religious man, and he felt like that they would be better off in heaven than without parents.
The next thing I see in your development of that night and his story to you is that there's that evil voice, a command voice, I guess it says kill the children when he's coming back
Yes.
from the grocery store.
Yeah.
And he doesn't talk about command voices. That's a voice telling you to do something, right?
Correct.
This is one of the only times that he's
Yeah.
ever described that to you.
That is one of the few times. I don't think that he acted just on a voice command. He was actually having other voices. He was having racing thoughts, but he definitely had that one command hallucination. I didn't put a whole lot of weight on that particular symptom at that moment.
The next step in your analysis is, from what I understand, if he told you, is in explaining why he did kill his children. He believed they would be better off if he took their lives than left them with their mother.
Yes. Or left them, yes. Well, he didn't think that their mother would be around.
Right. So they really wouldn't have a mother.
They wouldn't have a mother, and he would be in prison.
And like he was as he grew up.
Correct. And he was a religious man who believed that he would see him in heaven.
So is that a delusion, or is that just a belief?
That's a belief, but it's in the mix of a manic episode. So it's not a delusion. It's just what he believed, but he was had racing thoughts and was manic that I don't think that he really appreciated what that was going to turn into. Or the concept, or the fact that they could have lived with his parents.
Do you remember reading the reports of Agent Mackey with the FBI?
Yes, but you'd probably have to show me that particular report.
And he testified, and I can if you need it
Okay.
for you. He testified earlier.
Agent Mackey testified that he didn't write it, of course.
Whatever report you're referring to, you can go, but I remember there was one report written from that interview.
Doctor, do you remember the part of Agent Mackey's report when he says that Tim Jones said, let's cut to the chase?
I don't remember that. I'd have to look at the report. Sorry.
Do you remember the part where Tim said that what happened in Natan was out of anger, not out of fear?
I remember a piece of that, yes. It'd probably be better if you just show me the report.
That's okay, Doctor. Thank you. The last step, so the only delusion that he has going on at the moment is fear of the children that materializes that night, that coalesces that night. Is that a fair way to say it?
The only delusion, correct.
That's the only delusion going on. Everything else is
Manic.
thinking and choices.
Well, it's psychotic behavior related to mania.
So far, what I've asked you to know, you told me is not psychotic, you're just, I guess
Well,
I was
the-
asking whether those were delusions. When I was asking you about believing the children would be by Amber, that's what he believed. That's not psychotic.
That's what he believed when he was manic, yes.
Not a delusional, non-reality based.
I mean, he basically was hyper-religious and was grandiose and believed that they'd be better off in heaven. I mean, is it a clear-cut delusion? No. Is it manic behavior? Yes.
So
which is part of a major mental illness.
the last part is he says they would be better off if they were in heaven before he.
Yes.
That's a decision he made.
Yes,
That's not a delusion, that's his thought. That's his choice.
that's his thinking, yes,
He's making a value choice of what he thinks is best for the situation.
yes.
As far as Natan, you're saying that he did not appreciate the legal wrongfulness of his actions.
He didn't recognize that, yes.
And you're basing that, I guess, in part on the statement that's recorded with the question asking him, would you do it with a police officer standing at your shoulder?
In part, I mean, he was a very religious man who believed in discipline, excessive at times, obviously, and he had rituals that he followed with that. He felt very, very justified with that, and it was all it correlates with his religious thinking and that fundamentalist view of punishment.
So morally, as far as Natan, does that play an issue?
It's more of a moral justification versus kind of a moral wrongfulness thing. He felt justified by the PT he was doing or asking Natan to do, but it's less on a moral wrongfulness piece. I know that's complicated. Moral wrongfulness really gets more into capacity. This is more about just kind of the life that he had and what he believed in with discipline related to his religion.
So when we're talking about knowing the difference between moral right and wrong, we're not talking about what Tim Jones thinks, are we? We're talking about society, isn't that correct?
Not necessarily. There's subjective moral wrongfulness and objective. And this is more about subjective.
So Tim Jones gets to choose what he thinks is morally right and wrong?
Well, he's in a psychotic mindset. So in his mind, it's actually what he believes to be true and necessary.
So if I understand you, anybody who's got psychotic symptoms, has a major mental health diagnosis, and thinks they're morally justified in doing something is insane. That's what you're saying, correct?
But it has to be in the context of a major mental illness. He has a major mental illness. This is not just about someone who's just religious and acting out morally.
I understand, doctor. My question was, anybody who's has a major mental illness who thinks they are morally justified in doing something from their internal heart, you would say they were insane.
No, not necessarily. They would have to have these other symptoms to support that.
If somebody has schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and they have an active delusion going on that night, if they felt morally justified that whatever they did doesn't matter what society thinks, it's what I think is right and wrong, you're telling me that person's insane.
No, I'm not, because you haven't asked me. He did not have the capacity. He was not able to organize his thoughts. His thoughts were racing. He had manic symptoms that played a part in all of that. There's a psychotic component and there's a manic component to this.
So you're saying that somebody who has the manic part's the bipolar type.
Yes.
So there was schizophrenic who had delusions, who had a moral belief about something, they would always be insane?
It's not, I don't know that they would always be insane. That's not this particular situation.
Let's talk about the other children.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Let's talk about the other children.
The other children, okay.
As far as that, if I understand you, because Tim Jones has a major mental illness and has a delusion, and because he feels like his children would be better off in heaven, that makes him insane? That he can't appreciate the moral wrongfulness? It's because he thinks it's morally right. Is that what you're saying, doctor?
I think he just can't, he didn't have the capacity and couldn't appreciate that that was morally wrong in that moment. And a lot of it was
What do you base that on?
everything I've looked at with this case. This is a very extremely religious man who's mentally ill.
Tell me specifically why you are saying that he did not appreciate the moral wrongfulness of him killing his 4 children.
Because
Not just your opinion, I want to know why.
because he had strong beliefs about them being in heaven and being better off, and the fact that they would have no parents here. And he believed that if you have no parents, if you have no mother and no one to take care of you, that life's not worth living. I mean, he was very clear with a lot of that discussion. He wasn't thinking that his father or his stepmother or his grandmother could take care of the kids. It didn't cross his mind.
That's what he tells you.
He wasn't thinking of alternatives. That's what he told me. There's nothing that shows otherwise.
What if he didn't want Amber to have the other children? What if he thought, I'll punish Amber by killing them? That would be another possibility of why he killed them, wouldn't it?
It could be. I mean, he was planning to move with his children away to start medical school. I mean, he certainly had thoughts about moving and relocating somewhere else, not killing his children.
But for the 4 children who were left alive after Natan, Tim Jones thought he was going to go to jail.
He did. He did.
So isn't it possible that he killed the other 4 children to punish Amber?
It's possible. Certainly not not my opinion, but it's possible.
But that's not what he told you.
It's not what he told me.
And it doesn't matter, the way you're interpreting insanity, it doesn't matter what society thinks. It's what the individual thinks. Is that correct?
Well, I think you can look at both sides of it. In his situation, it was more subjective. It's what he thought.
I guess I'm still trying to understand why anybody who's charged with the crime who has a major mental illness can't say, I thought I was right when I did it. I thought I was justified, and that you wouldn't think. I'm confused.
I think you have to look at the whole picture in this case. This is not just someone who has a mental illness who is a religious man and feels justified. I think he is in the active throes of a manic state and he's psychotic. It's both of those components. It's really not that simple. It's a complicated situation.
But I asked what you're basing your opinion on, specifically, what's your answer?
About which part? I think I've answered whatever you've asked me.
Why his thinking that his children are better off dead means he's insane by going to heaven. Why is that insane?
He's not appreciating the wrongfulness of that. He thinks it's the right thing to do, to put them into heaven. They won't suffer. They're not in pain anymore. They will have no parents here. I mean, that was his line of thinking.
When you say he doesn't think that it's the wrong thing to do, I guess my question is, how is that not just a choice? How do you get to jump from the choice he makes to do what he wants to kill his children to he didn't understand that it was morally wrong? Connect that dot.
Because it's all the symptoms he had. He had racing thoughts. He was unable to sleep. He couldn't focus. He was hearing voices. I mean, it was all the active symptoms of psychosis and mania all at one time. He's not thinking rationally. It's not a clean, clear-cut delusional case. This case is complicated with mood component symptoms and with psychosis.
Well, let's talk about some issues of legal right and wrong. He didn't call 911 for Natan, did he?
No.
That shows, doesn't it, that he understood the legal wrongfulness of his act?
I don't think there's any question on that. I agree completely with Dr. Frierson's opinion on legal wrongfulness.
He did know that it was legally wrong.
I agree with that.
But that's not what your report says. Your report finds specifically
Oh, you're talking about Natan's thing. I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you were saying. Sorry about that.
on the timeline, your report found that he didn't understand the legal wrongfulness of what he did with the company.
He did not recognize when he was asking Natan to PT, when he was telling Natan to PT, he did not recognize that that would be legally wrong and that that would actually lead to death. He had no intention of harming him that way.
As he pushed him that hard and put hands on him until it caused his death, he didn't know.
He didn't think that that would happen.
All right.
No.
The moment Natan is dead, when he finds him, according to his own words, which is all we have to go on, he says, I'm not going to call 911 because they're going to think I killed him, right?
Right.
So you're saying while he was doing the PT and he didn't know and then he suddenly realized it? Is that the way this works?
I think he was shocked when it happened. He was completely shocked when he found Natan.
He didn't call 911 because he knew it was legally wrong what he had done to Natan, correct?
He knew that he thought he'd be blamed for it, yes.
So the only part that you're saying that he didn't know what he was doing was that moment.
When he was telling him to PT, to do, sit-ups and squats and everything, I don't think he appreciated the potential harm with that, is what I'm saying.
But after he realized Natan was dead,
The other things happened. And I was referring to the legal wrongfulness with that. Sorry.
the moment Natan's dead, he knew it was legally wrong.
Yeah, I think he panicked. Yeah.
And at that moment, he knows it was morally wrong for himself and for society.
Don't know about that. I think he felt justified in some way by telling him to do the PT.
Well, in the taped interview on September 8th, there's a quote where he says, my kid is dead at my hands, talking about Natan, my kid is dead at my hands. They're going to think I murdered him.
Right.
They, not the police.
Well, I thought he was talking about the police.
Well, I think he talked about both. I think he was afraid of the police. But my question to you is, when he says that, they're going to think I murdered him, that can be society.
Well, it could be, but he never said that. I mean, it said to me that he thought police would think that he did it.
So your opinion is for Natan that for the moment he was PTing him, that he didn't know legal right from wrong.
Right. He felt very justified in what he was doing.
As soon as Natan's dead, he knows it's legally wrong.
He panicked. Yes.
And as far as the moralness of that punishment of Natan, you don't have an opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it meets that test for moral wrongfulness, that particular one. I mean, I think he felt like that the punishment was at some level with what he thought from a religious perspective, that discipline was appropriate, but I don't think it rose to that moral wrongfulness level.
That's Christina Elke. Do you
Yes.
remember her, the babysitter?
Yes.
And do you remember how he lied and misled her?
Yes.
About the children still being alive and then saying that they were leaving?
Yes.
She's not law enforcement. She's somebody who cared for the children and who loved the children.
Right.
How can you not say that him lying and deceiving Christina Elke is not evidence of his moral wrongfulness?
I think it's evidence he didn't want to go to jail. He knew people would turn him in. I don't see how that's moral wrongfulness. Same thing with his family members. He avoided all of them. He made comments that he was just going to go to Vegas and basically, eventually he'd get caught and be arrested.
His dad, Tim Sr., we lied to his dad, and,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He didn't tell his dad because he was afraid of going to jail, or he didn't tell his dad because he couldn't tell his dad that he murdered his grandchildren.
I think in that moment he was thinking he wasn't responding to anybody because he thought he would end up someone would find him.
So that is not a recognition, in your opinion, of moral wrongfulness.
I don't think that is in this case.
His grandmother, he wouldn't take her calls or texts.
It's the same situation with her. Yeah.
You don't think that shows anything?
I think they would basically find him and have him arrested, and he knew he was going to be arrested anyway.
Amber, same thing? You lied to Amber.
Yes.
That doesn't mean anything to you other than legal.
It's legal. Yes.
Destroying the evidence, the bleach in the car, the internet searches for dump sites, dog searches in landfills, camping, Tim Jones missing children. That's all legal for you?
It's all legal wrongfulness.
For both children? I mean, for all 5 children? For Natan and the other ones?
Yeah, I think he's just destroying evidence, period, at that point to avoid arrest.
Well, if I understood, Natan, he only didn't understand during the moment of PT. When he realizes Natan's dead, you're saying then he realized the legal wrongfulness.
Right.
So there's just that moment.
Right.
Dumping the bodies in remote locations, legal.
Legal.
Just actually running and leaving the home and taking
Legal.
the bodies. If he truly was insane and didn't know right from wrong, wouldn't it have been common or possible for those type of people to just leave the bodies there and not try to hide anything?
Sure.
Search for extradition law is legal.
Yes.
Taking the battery out of the phone, legal.
Yes.
Making the list about how to discard and dispose all of his children, legal.
Legal.
On the September 8th interview, the tape interview, he says, quote, "God, I'm sorry."
He's remorseful at that point.
That's not morality.
At that point, it is. Yes.
So at some point, he realizes what he did was
Yes.
wrong. You're just saying at the moment that he had his hands
When
around
that's going
his
on.
throat, he didn't know moral.
Correct.
So after the bodies were found, he also said he didn't deserve to go to the funeral. That would be moral, but that's after the fact for you, so
Correct.
it doesn't matter to that moment.
Correct.
Stating he feels ashamed of what he has done, that's morality, but it's after the fact.
Yes.
So his actions really aren't important to you. What he does really isn't important. It doesn't matter in your determination of whether he knew legal or moral wrong for right.
Check to the form of the question.
I don't understand.
Let me rephrase. I understood what his question was, so
Thank you, Your Honor.
rephrase that.
You're limiting, if I understand correctly, Doctor, you're limiting your decision of whether he knew legal or moral wrong from right from what he tells you the moment, what he tells you after the fact about the moment he kills his children, whether it's Natan or whether it's strangling the other 4. It's what he tells you at the moment.
That's not true. I've considered all of it. I actually think that he did have knowledge of legal wrongfulness as it related to the other 4 children. I've looked at all of it. So I'm agreeing with Dr. Frierson on that.
When did he realize it was morally wrong to kill his other 4 children?
Probably as he started to clear, so I would think a couple of days after it happened.
Why do you say that?
Because of what we saw with his original statements.
What we saw in
When he basically was asking for forgiveness, and in that statement that I heard, that I've actually listened to.
How about in the tape interview? So when he says, he was asked this question, I know you liked the question about the police officer at your shoulder, but he was also asked, okay, when you did this, did you know society would condemn your actions even if they knew everything you know? And his answer was, I mean, at the time, I sort of didn't care. Does that statement mean anything to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think he wasn't thinking about it. He told me he wasn't thinking about anything else except what was going on in that moment. And with manic patients, that's what we see. They're often not rational.
Doctor, are you familiar with American History X, the movie?
Roughly.
You familiar that there's a violent prison man-on-man rape scene in it?
Yes,
Did you talk to Mr. Jones about it?
yes,
He told you that his story is that after he found Natan dead, he went and watched that.
yes.
Because he was worried that he would be in prison and that prisoners would think he was a baby killer and rape him, correct?
If prisoners are thinking about that, I guess that could be one perception, yes.
Well, what did he tell you?
Well,
Did you ask him why he watched it?
yeah, but I mean, I think he was afraid that he would get raped, yes,
Isn't that what I said?
yeah.
That's not law enforcement, is it?
What's not law enforcement?
Being raped in prison and
No.
worry about being raped by the prisoners has nothing to do with illegal, wrong, or right. I mean, yeah, you're going to get caught to get there, so I guess it does, doesn't it?
Yes,
But it also has to do with morality and society and what people, even if you want to call somebody down who's incarcerated, not even people on the street, people who are incarcerated would judge him. That's why he watched that movie, and that's what he told you, isn't it?
that's not what he told me, but I mean, he did watch the movie and he was afraid he would be raped. I don't think that he's assuming that all of these people are going to rape him just because of what's happened.
Okay, so he's just worried about being raped. It has nothing to do with him being judged.
I don't know if it has anything to do with him being judged. He certainly didn't say that.
You didn't ask him or he didn't tell you?
He didn't tell me that.
Okay. So him watching American History X rape scene while Natan's dead before he strangles his other children has nothing to do, in your opinion, with the morality of him knowing right or wrong of killing the other 4 children.
I think it has to do with the fact he knew he was going to jail and that those things could happen.
Okay. Thank you, doctor.
Right now. Mr. Young, how long are you gonna be, Mr. Young? The jury's giving me 5 minutes. You wanna,
Sure, we go ahead and take 5 minutes.
okay, take a couple minutes, they go back in here, don't discuss the case.